the current Ethereum system, we have this proof of work, which again is burning electricity. Why is it burning electricity? Because the consensus algorithm is a competitive one. You have hundreds, thousands of people or machines effectively who are competing to solve that one puzzle. Why? Because you want to provide incentive for for someone, some machine, some node to be the winner, given the right to say, this is the correct data, this is the correct block, okay? Now, is that the only way to do things? And the answer is no. So in terms of the environmental concerns, how do we get away from burning this electricity? We have to be a little bit smarter in terms of addressing this question of consensus. How do we arrive at a source of truth in a way that makes it not impossible, but very difficult for somebody who wants to cheat to participate and tamper with the actual writing of data to the blockchain, okay? And this is the question that we at Penta are trying to answer. We're trying to achieve a number of goals, one of which, the first goal, is how do we connect blockchains? How do we transfer value, regardless of what kind of token or consensus algorithm is being used? And the second question is, how do we provide a mechanism which makes it very difficult for somebody to cheat, somebody to be a bad player, a bad actor in the system? So let me describe a little bit of how we operate our consensus algorithm, which is called distributed state consensus. Okay, and for those, there was a question just very quickly. Somebody asked about the company name. There you go. That's my company, Penta Global. It just very quickly. Penta Global comes out of China, out of Shanghai and Singapore. The reason for the name is because the original name in Chinese and Mandarin means starfish. So a starfish, 5 things. So 5 arms, Penta. Okay, so how does our consensus algorithm work? The idea is as follows. Instead of competing, what we do is we've put into place basically an election system, okay? And what happens is that everybody who's part of our blockchain has the opportunity to be one of 2 types of nodes. You can be what's called a delegate node, that is to say somebody who's going to actually do the writing of the data onto the blockchain, or a witness node, somebody who's going to watch or monitor and oversee the activities of the delegate nodes. Now, anybody who's participating in the Penta blockchain is given an incentive, is rewarded with tokens, Pentacoin, for being part of the ecosystem. So there's incentive, again, motivation to take part. Now, what happens is that the entire community, the entire ecosystem, is divided up into little groups. And within each group, the delegates, the participants, senators, are the ones who are going to hold up and say, this is what I think the block should be. These are the transactions that should be written to the blockchain. And in that group, randomly, one of those, for each group, one of those delegate nodes is going to be selected as the representative of the group. Okay. Now, let's say we have 10 groups, and each group has, say, 10, 20 different nodes, participants. So in that one group, out of the 10, one of those nodes is going to be selected to hold up the block that's going to be written to the blockchain. The witness nodes in that group will look at all the different possibilities, all the candidates, and review that the data is correct, that there has been no tampering or changing something nefarious going on in terms of the data being written. Then all the groups, the candidates from each of the groups then are, out of all those groups, we have another election. And randomly, out of the first tier of groups, we select another set. So we go from, say, 10 groups down to 5 groups or 4 groups. And then there's another election, randomly choosing. At each point, you randomly choose out of one of those groups, one of them to represent, to go on to the next tier. And then finally, eventually, you end up at the top tier with 3 groups, 3 candidates. And then out of those 3 candidates, one will be selected at random elected effectively at random to be the block to be written to the blockchain. Now, how is this different from Bitcoin or Ethereum? And the answer is, instead of racing, burning electricity to solve a very difficult mathematical problem, we instead use the idea of random selection to basically pick out of all these different candidates the one that's going to be the correct block onto the blockchain, written to the chain, to the ledger. So the more participants we have, the greater the chance of that block being basically the correct block. And the reason is because if we only have a few participants, the chance of a bad actor, somebody who wants to corrupt the system, has a greater chance of being the one selected. But as the ecosystem grows, the bigger it gets, the less the chance of somebody coming in and corrupting the system, because they would have to be selected not only just once, but they have to be selected multiple times in order to be the one at the top, the one winner, as it were. Now, this all happens not over the course of days or hours, happens in a fraction or just a few seconds, effectively 5 seconds per election cycle, okay? And as a result of that, because we're not generating this enormous compute activity, okay, we address these environmental concerns, okay? How do we have a blockchain consensus algorithm that is both effective and secure, and one that does not generate this enormous overhead or load on the environment in terms of electricity production and burning? Okay? Now, in addition to our consensus algorithm, okay, I've got a lot of questions coming in. So let me finish up on this and I'll address some of those questions. What we also allow people to do is basically transact across blockchains. So if somebody wants to, from the Ethereum blockchain, wants to transact on Penta, we can basically do what's called an exchange. We can take tokens from the Ethereum blockchain and then basically make a copy of those and then burn the tokens on Ethereum. But effectively, what happens is we can exchange tokens across the blockchain. Not only that, specific to Ethereum, if you have a smart contract, you can run that same contract. You can run your Solidity code on Penta. So what we've done in some ways, this is just one way of looking at things. What we've done is to basically take the best of Ethereum, the best of Bitcoin, as it were, and allow people to, again, use what they've already built for Ethereum move on to Penta. Transfer all their work, as it were, their smart contracts, their tokens onto Penta and work in either ecosystem. And the idea is that as the world grows into using blockchain, that we can connect these different blockchains together so that the amount of liquidity, that is to say, the amount of activity which is needed to be a self-sustaining ecosystem is improved. Okay. So, all right, let me answer some of these questions here. I'm going to type in. You can find out about more about our token at penta.global. Next question is, what parameters are considered for the selection? Okay, so what happens there is that if I want to participate as a delegate, that is to say a person or a node that's going to write to the blockchain, okay, I have to stake. We're a proof of stake system. I have to put up a certain amount of tokens which are locked up and held in reserve. And that stake, my putting up those tokens, is the guarantee that I'm not going to cheat. The more tokens you put up, the more you're going to be rewarded in terms of, if you are selected, to write to the blockchain. So let me break that down or unpack that a little bit. Everyone who's participating, regardless of what kind of node you are, a monitoring and an overseeing node, or a participant in terms of writing to the blockchain node, everyone is rewarded for being part of a round of elections. So that's just being part of that ecosystem. On top of that, if I put up a stake and there's a certain minimum stake, I then can be selected as a delegate node, okay? And I would then receive, as part of being a participant active in one of these election cycles, I would receive, on top of my minimum allocation, I would receive a little bit more. If I'm a witness node, I would also receive, not as much as a delegate node, but I would also receive a portion of the allocation for that cycle. The selection, the parameters, as the question asked, for being selected as the node, it's random. Basically, if you are part of that election cycle, right? If you're a delegate node and you submit a block to be written to the chain, whoever is going to be the winner, as it were, that's done completely randomly. So there's no way to effectively game the system, to take advantage and corrupt the system, and to be the winner over subsequent cycles. In fact, the witness nodes are looking at the activity of the delegates, and they are also verifying the data of the block. If it is seen, so if the community comes together and says, this node is cheating the system, and there's agreement, thank you, and there's agreement in terms of that particular node is a bad player, the delegate who is cheating, the bad actor, will lose, not only will they lose their stake, but they'll basically be removed from participating further. So that's kind of the reverse of being selected. So there are penalties involved if you're found to be cheating. All right. Now there was, oh, we've got a lot of people coming in here. Okay, there was another question. Is your stake related to proof of stake algorithm? The answer is yes. So we use a proof of stake in terms of you being part of and acting in this system. So basically you're putting up some tokens, you're locking away tokens to be part of that election cycle. Now, some people have asked, well, you know, let's say I want to leave the system. And the answer is at any time you can. And then after the defined lockout period, your tokens will be returned back to you. Okay? But you do put up a stake in order to participate as a delegate node. Okay? The stake that you put up in terms of witness node is much less. In fact, we try and make it as easy as possible to be part of the Penta ecosystem. So the requirements, effectively, what we ask or what we require is a minimum hardware set. We want to make sure that the nodes that are being put out, and again, the code, as it were, the code base is open source, so anybody can basically come in and be a participating node, okay? The requirements of hardware are minimal, okay, to run the Penta node, okay? And so, again, in order to get started or to be part of this family, this community, stake, and again, a box, as it were, a hardware box, and then connecting up to the net. Okay, so Gerald's asking a couple of minutes ago, this is interesting, can I kindly get the full recorded webinar video? And I'm gonna leave that question to the Hacklab Foundation to answer. I'm not sure about that.
What's the question again?
Question is, can they get a full recorded webinar video?
Yes. So I am copying a Google form link now. Enter your emails. And I will send it to you. Yeah, I just did.
So now let's move away a little bit from consensus algorithms. Let's go to, again, public chains and building applications. Okay. What we've done is, or what my goal with Penta, with my co-founder David Ritter, our goals is to provide a blockchain system, consensus algorithm, and a whole platform whereby people can use blockchain to build applications, okay? Not just to do an ICO, an initial coin offering, and to try and raise money and to become rich very quickly, but to actually use blockchain in different areas of application, many of which I have no idea about, okay? The thrust of this, the main point, is that there are many problems in the world which are global in scale. They involve, for example, again, mining operations. They involve people from all over the world participating together. Now, in the past, in order to, for example, ship mining ore from, so shall we say, the center of Africa to China or to Australia here, for whatever purpose, involves a record that is copied over and over and over and over again as we move through this application, call it an application. Every time you do one of these transfers, the whole process is slowed down. There's also costs involved. So if I do not trust you, you're a truck driver who's moving ore to the dock. Now, how do I know if some of that ore has somehow been moved or lifted off the truck? How much should I pay the truck driver? And the idea is that, or again, in the past, the idea is that I don't trust you. So I'm protecting my interest. So when you come forward, I look at a ledger, I make an entry in my own ledger. And then we go through this process of copying data over and over and over again. Eventually, the truck driver may or may not get paid. Who is going to pay that truck driver, and when are they going to pay the truck driver? Okay. Now, on a larger scale, global climate change, for instance, this is a topic of great interest to everyone around the world. These are problems that involve everyone agreeing on a source of information. We cannot address these problems without having a common ledger, one that operates in digital space, over the internet. So what we're doing with blockchain in a lot of ways is we're digitizing trust. We're finding a way by which we can agree and trust each other in a trustless environment. And with blockchain, we have the ability to then carry out business to try and solve these problems, these large-scale problems, which span an enormous geographic area. Whereas in the past, we've been confined by a lack of trust to doing business only in a small region, because I will only do business with someone that I can see, someone in my local area, somebody that I know. But with blockchain, for the first time, we can do business, we can solve problems over a global scale, because I don't need to see you. I don't need to know you. All I need to know is that the blockchain is carrying the correct record, the contract, the ledger that is trusted by everyone involved. And that trust comes out of the fact that the consensus algorithm, the agreement as to what the data is a process, a procedure by which it's very difficult and near to impossible to cheat, to change or corrupt the data, to delete some data. Okay, so these applications that we use, and again, in terms of smart contracts, okay, these applications are ways by which we can not only move information around, but we can also manage activity. So let me give you an example. Again, this mining, the truck driver, okay, at the mine, for instance, we have scales that are measuring the weight of the ore that's coming out of the ground. Now, every time, let's say, a ton of ore or a truckload of ore is put onto the truck, we can make a measurement. We can weigh how much the truck is before the ore is put on, and we can weigh the truck after the ore is put on. Now, every time we do one of those measurements, we can write that information onto the blockchain. So everybody around the world can see at this time the truck was empty and the weight was so many tons. After the ore's been put onto the truck, we do another measurement, and that data is written onto the blockchain. So everybody around the world can see how much ore has been put onto the truck. Then the truck moves through or goes to a port. We can make a further measurement, and write that onto the blockchain. Okay? Now, since the data cannot be basically tampered with, you can't delete the data or change the data once it's onto the blockchain. When the truck arrives at the port, we can compare the contract, which is also on the blockchain, so the code can't be changed. We can then have on that contract a little bit of code that says if the weight of the truck and the ore is the same as the weight of the truck and the ore at the mining site, then pay the truck driver so much per ton. So instead of the workers involved in this supply chain being paid 6 months or not at all, for example, in the case of government workers, right? Instead of them basically waiting until they get paid, they can be paid immediately because the contract will automatically transfer tokens from the blockchain to, say, a second blockchain or a third blockchain. And that blockchain, in turn, can transfer and exchange those tokens for fiat currency. And that fiat currency can be automatically deposited into their bank accounts. So that's one way we can use blockchain to make this sort of antiquated, obsolete, well, not quite obsolete, but antiquated system much more efficient. So processes that usually take days or weeks or even months can be collapsed down into basically real-time processing. And again, all the participants can see exactly what's happening at every point along the way. Let me give you another example. So if the ore is altered, so that's a very good question. So the question is, again, what happens if somebody takes something out and puts something in, something else in, right? And the answer is, yeah, you could do it. Be very difficult, right? Okay, so there was a question about, again, what if somebody plays around with something? So let me give you a slightly different example. Okay, so something that Penta is doing this, actually the end of this month, we're very much involved with the Internet, IoT, Internet of Things for agriculture. So this is another application that we're involved with. Okay, so in that case, or I'm going to give you a slightly different example. What we can also do on the blockchain, for instance, is let's say we're working in agriculture, okay? We can do plant DNA, and we can actually, more or less in real time, we can analyze and do a fingerprint of a plant's DNA. So let's say you buy a few tons of a fruit, a certain kind of plant, okay, fruiting plant that you want to take to your farm, okay? So you purchase on the blockchain, you have a smart contract that says, I'm going to buy a ton of this kind of seed or this kind of plant, and I'm going to transplant onto my farm, okay? And the question that person was asking about the ore, what would let's say I buy a certain kind of plant, but what I actually receive is a different kind of plant, okay? So what we can do with blockchain now, we can effectively have a little box, okay, about this big, and we can take a sample of that plant or plants, and that sample can be used, we can actually do a DNA fingerprint of that plant. And that DNA can be written, that fingerprint, the data, can be written onto the blockchain. And now, if somebody tries to change out the different kind of plant, let's say tobacco, for instance, and sort of use or substitute an inferior kind of plant or a different kind of plant, at the receiving end, we can do a DNA fingerprint of what has been transported to my farm. And I can compare the two. If the fingerprint doesn't match, I don't accept the transport, right? I don't pay for that because it's not what I bought. Now, let me give you another example in terms of, let me give you another example of what, and answer this latest question about the cost. What we're doing in the United States as an experiment at the end of the month is we're going to be putting little devices that cost, roughly speaking, about $30 US to measure temperature, humidity, light levels, and a number of other things. And we're going to be putting these little boxes. They basically report every few minutes. They report the temperature and the conditions of an area. Let's say the inside of a container. And what we're going to do is we're going to track shipping of apples from the Midwest of the United States to ports and to processing plants. Now, why do we want to do that? For a couple reasons. One, again, is that we want to make sure that people aren't cheating. They're not taking apples out and putting different apples in. Not only that, we want to make sure that while we're transporting these commodities, apples, vegetables, whatever it might be, agriculture products, we're trying to keep those products cold. As temperature goes up, bacteria grows, and the fruit, the vegetables, the product spoils. And once it's spoiled, it's no good. No one's going to buy it. Approximately, roughly speaking, 25 to 30% of all agricultural products that are shipped around the world are lost due to spoilage. Why? Because the containers got too warm. If they go up over 4 or 5 degrees, we start to get spoilage in the crop. You can't really tell because the actual spoilage is internal. So that crop goes to the market, as it were, and then the retailer throws, again, we throw away about 25%, a quarter of all the crop. In the case of strawberries, it's about 50%, half. Now the cost, the price of that spoilage is passed along to the consumer. The buyer of those strawberries, those apples, corn, coffee beans, rice, is paid for by the end consumer in the form of higher prices. Not only that, the farmer basically has to take a lower price for their product because the retailer, the buyer on the other side of the supply chain, will pass along the costs to the farmer. So the farmer has to wait longer for their crop to be paid for. They have to accept less for what the crop's worth, and it costs them more in terms of shipping this product around. So with blockchain and with these little IoT devices to make measurements of temperature, humidity, and so on, for the first time, we're able to track in real time the shipping of goods around the world. Okay? The cost, again, for the actual hardware is, again, for a container, it's somewhere around $30, $40 US. We also can do things, for example, we can have little credit card chips that can do basically the same thing. And these chips, again, they're about this size. They have a little, again, they have a little chip embedded, and they can write data, temperature data, humidity data, gases, and so on onto the chip. The cost of these devices is a few dollars per card. So we can actually put the cards into the boxes with the agricultural product. Now, without blockchain, even if we do have the data, we don't have the ability to be sure, the guarantee, that the data is correct, that it hasn't been tampered. So it's the combination of data acquisition, application, and the blockchain together that makes it for an end-to-end system. And that's what we're testing out with our Penta network, Penta blockchain, is the ability to run this kind of application, a real-world application, for the digital economy using the blockchain.
Okay.
Now, somebody's still got their mic on. Okay, so let me keep going. How does Penta build these applications? Why are we interested in this? Because again, these applications are proof that the blockchain is a way to transact, to do business, to solve these kinds of problems on a global scale. Okay, let me give you another example. The transportation of pharmaceuticals, okay? A container of, say, vaccines, medicines, okay? It's worth millions of dollars, millions of dollars. If those vaccines, again, if the temperature control of that container, shipping container, goes over a few degrees, effectively we have to throw it away. Now in the past, sometimes that container of that vaccine, even though the vaccines are probably spoiled, that is to say, ineffective, they still will be moved through the transport system and basically bought and paid for and administered to patients. Even though the vaccine is worthless, it will not work. So with blockchain, with temperature monitoring, we have the ability, again, to, if the container, for example, the refrigeration goes out, no electricity on the ship or whatever it might be, for the first time, we can see that happen in real time. So we can get somebody to fix the refrigerator, to keep the temperature low, and again, guarantee that those vaccines are going to be useful, and that we don't have to effectively destroy everything in that container and then ship a new batch out. Once more, these are million-dollar kind of items. Each container shipping thousands of vials of vaccine, millions of dollars of transaction. Let me give you yet another example. In China, which is the world's largest consumer of rice, between 10 and 20% of what's in a bag of rice is actually plastic and glass. Now think about that. You buy a bag of rice, and 10 to 20% of what's in there is not rice, it's something else. With blockchain, with IoT, with monitoring devices, we can then check to see if that bag of rice is truly 100% rice. And what's amazing, what's come out, so this is something that Penta's already done as a trial over the last couple of years. We have something like 30,000 rice farmers in China all working together on the blockchain, on basically Penta blockchain, to monitor what's going into that bag of rice and to prove to the consumer that what they're eating is truly unadulterated, uncontaminated rice. What's amazing is that now, for the first time, people are willing to pay not just a little bit more for that guarantee, for the blockchain certification. They're willing to pay 2 times or 3 times as much as they would for just a simple bag of rice without any guarantees, blockchain guarantees or certifications. 200, 300%. So the retailer is making more money, and everybody else in the supply chain, including the farmer, are making more money, and there's less waste. All because of blockchain. Okay, let me give you another example. I'm wondering if you're familiar about, these 2 airline crashes. So Ethiopian Airlines, the 737 MAX, and so on. Now, the records, the maintenance records for airplanes, jet airliners, okay, are written records where people are certifying, and those records are moved through a system, okay? Now, we wait until a crash actually happens before we go back to those records to check what's been done or what hasn't been done. With something like blockchain, we're now able to have an application which can check those records before the plane takes off and to make sure that all the correct maintenance has been done on that airplane. Not only that, we can check the serial numbers of the parts, and we can make sure that the parts have been written onto the blockchain, so we can check that the correct parts have been used and people have not substituted different parts or incorrectly put in the wrong piece of machinery into that airline or that jet. Okay, so there's been a question about security. All right, so let me explain again how security works in the blockchain. When I write data onto a blockchain, I can use what's called a hashing out. No matter how much data is involved, I can produce a unique string, a unique signature for that data. And that signature is actually written onto the blockchain along with the data itself. Okay? Now, if I want to check to see whether somebody has changed the data after it's been written, okay, I can take that data and run it through the same algorithm, the same function, which will produce another signature. I can compare that signature against the signature that's written onto the blockchain. If the signatures are different, if somebody changes a single letter, a single in that data block, in the data that's been written, the signatures will be completely different. Not just a little different, but completely different. So it's very easy to spot whether or not data has been changed or altered. Now, another point, another facet of security is, well, what if I change something on one node? Well, that's not going to work because we have a whole set of nodes. We have, in the case of Ethereum, you have thousands of nodes. And as Penta grows, we hope to also have thousands of nodes participating in the ecosystem. And what that means is that you not only have one copy of the ledger, you have thousands of copies of the ledger. So at any point, at any time, you can, if somebody tries to corrupt and change one of the node's copies of the ledger, then that node will be in disagreement with all the other nodes. In order to corrupt the system, in order to tamper or change the data, you not only have to change it in one location, you have to change it in all the locations. But if you do that, not only do you have to change it in all the locations, but you also have to change it in a way so that all the hashes change. And blockchain itself is such that not only do you have to change one transaction in one block, but you also have to change all the blocks, after that. So it makes the problem not impossible. In theory, you could do that. You could change all the data on all the nodes and all the blocks on each one of those nodes in order to have the hash agree with your one change. That's not impossible, but it's highly improbable. In fact, it's cheaper, it's less expensive to just be honest and play the game correctly versus trying to be dishonest and game the system. And that's the whole foundation in terms of security of the blockchain. Security does not mean it's impossible. Security on the blockchain means that we make it very, very difficult and very expensive for you to cheat. And because of that, it's not a binary system. It's a spectrum. It's a scale. So some systems are very easy to tamper or corrupt. If you have a paper system, if you only have one copy of a ledger, if I can erase and change the entry in the ledger, I've corrupted it. If I have two copies of a ledger, I have to change it in both places. If I have 100 copies of a ledger, it becomes very, very difficult to change it in every location, especially if those locations are scattered around the world. Okay, so that's the security aspect. Now, there's then the next question. In terms of political elections, the answer is yes. We would very much like to be involved in sort of using blockchain as a way to verify voting practices. Okay, and this brings up a whole different area, and that is how do we have a way to identify me as me on the blockchain? And this is an active area of both application and engineering and research. So it falls under the topic of what's called sovereign identity. So instead of me going to a centralized authority and identifying myself. So for instance, here in Australia, here's my Australian driver's license. This identifies me. The government says Steve Melnikoff is the person holding this card. There's my picture. And I can use this card to identify myself to either a government agency or doing business, for instance, okay? This is who I am. If I'm traveling around the world, I have a passport. That passport identifies me as a citizen of Australia, a citizen of the United States. Okay. So how do we take those ideas of a centralized authority and decentralizing, allowing me to hold my identification and to be able to use that identity, digital identity, to verify that I am who I am when I'm acting or working on the block or transacting on the blockchain. So for instance, in an election, we go to a voting booth or whatever, to a place where they're going to count the votes and so on, take my vote. I go in, and the first step is I have to identify myself. Am I registered to vote? Am I Steve Melnikoff? And if the answer is yes, then I can proceed to cast my ballot. Okay. With blockchain, we have the ability now, instead of having these antiquated systems or a mishmash of systems, we have the ability to have an unalterable record. One, excuse me, a record that, excuse me, a record that allows me to identify myself, and a record that shows that I voted at this time in this place. But not only that, if you remember back, I was talking about hashing. What I can now do with these hashing algorithms is that once I once I cast my vote, I can sign that vote. I can have a digital signature, and only I have the key to that signature. No one else can basically go in and change my vote after I cast it. Because once I sign that vote, there is a digital hash which is stored onto the blockchain along with the voting information. So now I can compare that hash when I'm tallying, when I'm adding up the votes. I can compare that hash signature with the vote. I can make sure that the data has not been changed. And the only person that can sign that vote is me, because I hold the key. And that's the way we can use blockchains in the election process. Now, there's still a long way to go with that, but it's an idea, I think, whose time is quickly coming to the fore. And it's another example of how we can build applications on a public blockchain for these kinds of big problems. Okay. Okay, so the next question was, let's see, a couple other questions. Sorry, and I know we need to wrap up in a few minutes. Okay, so people are asking about the onboarding costs. Okay, and the answer is they're actually minimal. The actual hardware, what we're hoping to do. What we're hoping to do at Penta with our technology rollout is to make these devices, the actual hardware, available to the farmers as being part of the system. So basically, we absorb that cost. Okay? So for the farmer, we don't want the farmer. We know that farmers, people in agriculture, people in these different industries, whether it's farming or mining or the other areas, for example. We know that, these are not industries where the farmers have an abundance of resources. Again, the tractor sharing. So what we're trying to do at Penta is we'll be the ones who supply that hardware. The cost of onboarding is shifted away from the farmer to the consumer or to the retailer, the people who are actually selling the end product. The reason is because by doing that, instead of a few farmers absorbing the cost of thousands of sensors, that cost is shared amongst hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So the incremental cost, the unit cost that's added to the product is very small. It might be 5% or 10%. But what that means is that the farmer can participate using IoT, these sensor devices, and be onto the blockchain for effectively zero cost. What they need to do, though, is be active and take part. They have to be saying to us, yes, we would like to be part of this new world, this new generation of technology. And we're hoping that through these kinds of webinars that we raise awareness, that through you, we can generate new ideas, new applications, and we can find ways of using this technology in the local environments. Because what works in the United States probably will not work in Africa. What's been successful in China will not translate to the same use in Australia. Completely different environments. And we're not the local experts. You're the local experts for Africa. I'm not. I'm certainly not the local expert for Africa. So we're hoping, again, to engage with you, to become part of our ecosystem, and thereby move this technology out to where it can be used and needed the most. Okay, so there's a question shifting from many to many validation to one to many validation. Oh, okay. Let me write my email and then answer this last question from Emmanuel about different algorithms and different ideas. I'll give you one as a completely different example of how you can do this. Okay. First, my email address. Okay. And so those are the two email addresses. The first one's mine, and the second one is David Ritter, my co-founder and the CEO of Penta. So please send your emails through. We'd be happy to answer your question. Now, this last one from Emmanuel, let me give you a different approach to all this, okay? This sort of validation algorithm, okay? Let's say I need to choose one of the blocks to be selected for writing onto the blockchain, okay? And I want to make things such that if somebody wants to cheat, I want to make it as difficult or impossible for them to actually cheat. Okay, so let's say I have 100 people who are all participating in this blockchain. Okay, so me, Steve, I've got a block. Here's my data. This is what I want to have written. Okay, and then Emmanuel says, well, this is my block. This is what I want to write. Okay. And we have to choose, is it me or Emmanuel? Which one do we use, okay? Now here's how we can do it. This is different from Penta, but it'll give you an idea of how we can do this kind of random selection. There are different ways of doing the same thing. Penta's trying, again, our particular algorithm is our first basically publicly available one, but we have a number of other ideas that we're trying out in the lab. Let's say that each of us, of the 100 participants, we have to select one of 10 boxes to put our little block in, okay? So I have to pick box number 1, number 2, number 3, and then I'm gonna put my data set into that box, okay? Now, in the past, in many of these sort of algorithms, competitive algorithms, we say, okay, the box that has the most pieces of paper in is the one we're going to select. And the other ones we're going to sort of toss up. And then we're going to take that box and then we're going to look at what's in inside that box. All right. So if I want to cheat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have lots and lots of nodes. So let's say of those 100 participants, if I can have 51%, 51 of those, my nodes, my pieces of paper, and I put them all in the same box, then I'm going to win every time because I have the majority. So I can write anything I want onto the blockchain because I will always be the one who's selected. That's not a good process. Let's change things just a little bit. Instead of picking the box with the most votes, pick the box with the least votes. So if people are randomly, random participants are putting stuff in the different boxes, if I am the cheater, as it were, and I have 51 votes, as it were, in these boxes, I don't know which one to put it in because I won't know which one is going to have the least number of votes because that's the one who's going to win, not the one with the most number of votes. And in that way, we make it impossible for somebody to cheat because randomly you can't pick which one of these boxes is going to be used. And that's the essence of the Penta system. Our blockchain, our consensus algorithm is based on the idea that ahead of time, you cannot pick which one's going to be the winner. And by having a okay. So is it Foster? Foster, you're at Hacklab?
Yes, I am.
So there's a link in the chat. So I think the answer is it's immediately available. Now, you also have my email address. So if there's specific information I can give you, this was more of a general introduction, but if there's specific information we can provide you, again, in terms of dates and times, when we're releasing code, that sort of thing, and how you can participate and be part, please just send an email through, and we'll make sure we get back to you as quickly as possible.
Super. Thank you very much, Doctor, for having us. I think this was an insightful conversation. I'm sure everybody who joined really enjoyed it. I want to tell all of you to look out for Hacklab 2019. If you happen to be in Ghana and in Kumasi between the 19th and 21st, we'll be hosting the largest hackathon in West Africa, bringing together over 600 developers and about 30 mentors to brainstorm and build use cases for blockchain technology to solve most of our problems in Ghana and Africa to a larger extent. So thank you all, and have a lovely evening in this side of the world, and have a great day on the other side of the world.
Thank you very much. And we didn't even need the blockchain for that.
At all.
Please, when should we expect the videos?
So please follow the link. I shared the link, a Google form in the email, in the chat. Follow that link. I'm resharing it now for those who missed it.
Yeah, maybe you should put it back down. There it is. Okay. All right. Once again, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to go back to sleep. You all take care. Bye now.
Bye.